right, so we're just going to kind of circle around, look around. So sorry if the backs are to you at any point for too long. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're talking about disrupting social change, and I just want to start off with a little bit of context. In the last 10 to 12 years, the nonprofit sector has grown by 60%. There are now over 1.5 million organizations just in the United States that are hundreds or thousands of organizations with similar missions that are frankly competing with each other. And that impact is causing less money to be donated to organizations than ever before. Their donor and advocacy fatigue is huge. I mean, how many times have you all gotten fundraising appeals or action alerts in your daily lives from a million nonprofits, and you're just like, I just don't know which one to donate to. Of course you should donate to NWF.
Sorry about that, guys. I know we were guilty of it.
And we're also seeing a decline in email response rates, which is actually really significant for organizations because email addresses in terms of these are our advocates, these are our donors, these are our lifeline. And then just to give you a little bit more context, the nonprofit sector has been hit huge by the recession, and they're not expected to recover until 2018. So when you think about it, to solve the world's toughest problems, we need to be creating more innovative and effective organizations, and that's going to change the way we do business, and that really means disrupting social change. I know you hear a lot about that in the tech sector, but the nonprofit community needs that more than ever. So Danielle, do you want to talk about some of the 3 topics we'll be exploring today?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about 3 topics or kind of cover them, and then we definitely want, there's a lot of knowledge in the room, so, and I've heard that it's been very explosive with awesome comments. But so with the nonprofit sector, you guys are familiar. One of the ideas that we want to talk about today is, well, first of all, the tech stuff is already kind of happening. But we're looking for new revenue streams as nonprofits. You know, it's not just about asking for donations. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about that. Also just changing nonprofits, how we think of them. You know, like what is that? What does it mean to be a nonprofit? I think in a lot of ways we're seeing all these things already. And then the third one is, when is it time for a nonprofit to die? Which is another topic that a lot of people talk about. So, and I mean, it's a tough one, but those 3 things I think are happening on varying levels across, you know, the world, right? You see a lot of growth and then you see a lot of decline, and you have to wonder, you know, when's the right time for a nonprofit, and what is their role going to continue to be? From the perspective of National Wildlife Federation, we've been around for over, I think it's like 78 years now. We were founded in 1936, so I can do math, but I won't. But one of the things that we're always looking at is how are we relevant when people can go and start a Kickstarter and save their local stream if they want to, you know? So what's our role when initially we were organized together to kind of be this this place for people to come in and save wildlife? How can we continue to be relevant and do that stuff? So we're going to talk about that and hopefully start a really dynamic conversation, because I think on some level all these things are happening, but it's figuring out, you know, where you want to be and do all that. So
great. So first we want to talk about being self-sustainable, because as nonprofits you can have a lot of heart working on social justice issues, but equally as important, you also really need a head for business. If you can't bring in money, you can't grow your organization. And if you can't grow your organization, there is no way in the world that you are going to solve the world's toughest problems. So Danielle, how can we be leveraging alternative revenue models? Can nonprofits look at, for instance, offering consulting services? For instance, you work in the environmental community. There is plenty of for-profit environmental businesses out there and products. Could you be working with some of those businesses and providing consulting services in how they could be creating products that are actually not hurting the environment but helping to protect it?
Yeah, so to I'm really honored to be here representing all nonprofits. I just want to say, and I do have all these answers. But one of the things, but they're really good questions, right? And National Wildlife Federation historically actually did used to have a group of large businesses, including oil companies and everything else, where they would actually consult as the organization and say, this is how you can help wildlife in your practices. Nowadays, under transparency, and we certainly had some leadership changes, I'm pretty sure that we'd get a lot of scrutiny for doing something like that. That's not saying that other nonprofits can't do it, and it's not saying that there isn't an opportunity there. But I think finding alternate revenue streams is something that we need to at least consider, right? Because whether it's corporations working together, whether it's figuring out how do we, I've actually considered kind of consulting for social media for like National Wildlife Federation, like just new ideas, right?
That's a great idea.
Not killing things initially just based on, oh, well, we've never done that before. National Wildlife Federation has pretty much always sustained itself through other revenue channels. We were one of the leaders in direct mail because we came up with the stamp, and that's like what put us on the map as an organization. So for all the spam you get, I think it's kind of our fault. So I'm sorry, which is ironic because anyway, situational irony. But the point is that now we have our kids magazines, and in an industry that's not doing super well, right? Magazines, even though they're great and they're still educational, it's figuring out. So I think a lot of nonprofits that are larger and older are facing these issues, whereas the smaller ones are trying to self-sustain and probably working on the same issues where you're seeing individual donors kind of trail off, and people are wanting to donate more specifically to campaigns and not just to general funds anymore.
Right.
So it's an interesting kind of switch.
So have you all experimented with that?
Yeah, we've done some. We've actually started. We've looked into kind of doing all sorts of innovations, from looking through patents and seeing kind of what new technologies are out there to like even do like a different kind of composting and partnering with that, or doing like all sorts of. The business industry is one that we're interested in, but ultimately it's really. It's about getting in there with the right partner and finding the sweet spot, and also not compromising your mission, right? And so that's what nonprofits really have to grapple with.
So I was thinking about an environmental organization that we work with. They're not the Greenpeaces of the world. They don't really have an advocacy base. What they do is they come in and they work with all corporations that have a negative impact on the environment. So thinking about the oil industry, and they're trying to bring them to the table, and they've been doing this for years, and it is a very long process. To be able to meet with them in a neutral way and be like, this is how we need to be able to work together to change the environment. And I think that's hard for organizations like you who are supported by a huge member base when you start exploring these corporate partnerships that have a perception of like, these are the evil companies. But these are the companies that actually need to change, and they need organizations like NWF and all sorts of environmental organizations to teach them how to become responsible. And this is what you can be doing when you are doing your work to protect the environment, to protect wildlife. And how do you manage that with your members who are also your donors? Yeah,
so NWF, for those of you who don't know, National Wildlife Federation, we have a large member base, right? In fact, most of our donors give like $15, or it's not a lot of money, but it's a lot of different people, and it's great. And we're traditionally grassroots focused. So when we come in with a partner and they haven't had a say in it, it doesn't actually work out that well. Although as you were talking, I was like, it'd be interesting if we partnered with that company, and like added value or like figured out a way. But I think my big thing, and the reason why I started doing the work I do, is because I want to make NWF relevant, right? We're kind of dorky. We're not like wildlife. Not everybody's thinking about them all day like me. They're
not thinking about bats.
I'm thinking about bats pretty much all day. But so thinking about like all these different species and how I would be really lonely without wildlife, that's not like a thing most people are thinking about. So figuring out how do we stay relevant and continue to offer value to our members and people. And it's, when you can go and self-organize now with the internet and all these technologies we're learning about, it's exhilarating, and it's also like, well, does National Wildlife Federation have like a place in here that would actually,
Yeah.
you know, because in the past, like we were formed by a bunch of Boone and Crockett clubs kind of coming together.
Right.
And, so can we continue to be that space where people can come and know they're helping wildlife when they interact with us?
So let's move on to crowdfunding campaigns. So you and I both have done a lot of crowdfunding campaigns.
With varying degrees of success.
So I know a lot of I just got a call yesterday from an organization, and they're like, we want to get 90,000 donors in 4 months. How about we launch a Kickstarter? You know, and I'm just laughing. I'm like, that's ridiculous. And I was like, I think it's great to do crowdfunding campaigns, but I think you have to have incredible realistic expectations in terms of what the campaigns can do in terms of bringing money and bringing new donors, and it takes a lot of work to launch these campaigns. And like you're right, sometimes they do really well and sometimes they're a complete flop. So what's your experience been with crowdfunding campaigns, and do you see this as a viable alternative revenue stream for nonprofits?
So again, like I said, we're not on the minds of everyone, so I think it's a little bit different. But I think for us, it's with crowdfunding. When someone comes to me, because they're like, Danielle, let's crowdfund, it'll go viral.
Right.
Everyone's
going to donate.
I actually had someone say, what if we just came up with an app where it syncs their bank account to our donation? And I'm like, okay, that's
pretty funny.
Like, the problem is not that they don't know how to donate to us, right? Like, and I appreciate it. Like, I work with brilliant people,
awesome.
So I'm not at all like it's just kind of interesting, like the differences. So with crowdfunding, I'm always thinking, okay, you know, do you have ambassadors that are excited to crowdfund on your behalf? Mm-hmm. Because to be honest, like the amount of money that comes out of it, like, and we're already paying for a larger system like Convio or some of these other things that actually provide you with donation forms.
Right.
It has to outweigh, you know, the benefit has to outweigh that. And the flip side is, like, so from a tech geek side, mm-hmm. I get really excited using things like CrowdRise and, you know, seeing the technology work and seeing how easily it is to share and mobile optimize. And so from that perspective, I look at it. But I also say, if you're coming to me with a campaign and this isn't something you would normally fundraise through our organization's systems that we have in place, mm-hmm. then we need to make sure that there's a social aspect to it, which is you do have people who are excited to fundraise for you, which is not always the case, right?
Right.
But this is a timely question because I'm like writing these strategy documents late at night being like, I don't know. Because, you know, crowdfunding has a lot of potential, and some of the times we have seen it work is when there's a large donor being like, I want to do this publicly and I have my own network and I will, you know, and that tends to be better for us. Now, mm-hmm. I've seen smaller orgs who have a fiery base, really excited, just light it up on these sites, and it's great.
Yeah, it's inspiring.
And it's really inspiring. Like, there are a lot of smaller organizations that a little less, you know, stodgy, or I don't know. I love us, so you have to understand, like, it's like insulting your family, like, don't do it, but I can do it. But one of the things that we kind of are always playing with is, you know, is the technology just a shiny object, or is this the best way to get our stuff done? And a lot of the crowdfunding stuff is also not really feeding into the problem that we need donations through the general fund. Like, a lot of it's very specific into restricted. Yep. And if you're going through restricted funding on a nonprofit, I don't know how relevant this is to all of you, and feel free to jump in, but it's a complicated process for our finance department. It's not even that it's like bad, it's totally fine, but if you raise $500 through CrowdRise for a small program, the finance department probably has to spend that trying to figure it out and track it down. So
this really segues well into our next topic, which is the way that we think about charities is dead wrong. And this is based on a talk that Dan Pallotta gave at a TED conference. And you bring up a really good point, because donors really want to fund specific programs. They want to know that the money that they gave is having an impact. And that perception really needs to change, because you can't create social change and solve the world's toughest problems for free, or going to a specific initiative in an organization that is actually working on this monstrous problem. So how do you communicate with your donors when the best thing that an organization can get is general funds, because that means it gets to be spent on anything that you need to support this organization, make it thrive, and work on a variety of programs. So how do you explain this, not just to your members and donors, but also to foundations who also do not want to fund general operating?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that comes back to transparent communication, right? Like if they trust that you're spending your money well, the hope is that they'll continue to want to do it, right?
Right.
For us, like I know that we've definitely seen a downward climb and a downward spiral with just generic donations. And that's okay, and that goes back to disruptive social change, which is, do we need to change the way charities are running? Like, do we kind of flare up and then flare down, or do we as the public need to kind of have a realistic impression that if we want National Wildlife Federation to exist, that we're going to donate knowing that it's going to go into a fund that may fund, our I don't know, my job, right? Right. But I think that for me, at least the way I would tackle that is just being very clear and saying, what you've done so far has been incredibly meaningful for X, X, and X, but the greatest need right now is actually to make sure we have a finance department so that we know that we're, tracking these things, right? That kind of thing.
One of the things that I also think is worth talking about, we only have about 5 minutes left, is we need to really invest in recruiting the best talent inside the organization and really spending money on marketing. And that's something that Dan talks about too, and how when he was doing the AIDS ride and the breast cancer walks, and he was raising hundreds of millions of dollars, when the media found out that that money was being spent on overhead, which of course we all need to spend on overhead, and it was being spent on marketing and salaries, he was crucified. And his business went out like overnight. And so we need to really reframe the way that we think about how charities work, and that money does need to be spent on marketing. Money does need to be spent on recruiting talented people like you and being able to afford to keep you, to raise awareness, to bring in money, and to ultimately solve these problems. So I'm curious, is that a struggle that you are seeing in the nonprofit sector, particularly people who are thinking about the next phase of their life? Maybe they want to buy a house. Maybe they want to have kids and send them off to college. And yet there's corporate America who can pay much more competitive salaries. So how do you think that people are dealing with this in the nonprofit sector?
I think that that's part of the reason why turnover is kind of high, and we end up having a lot of different jobs. But it's, I think the experience you get in a nonprofit job is fantastic in that, you're doing 20 different things. I think the future of it, and what I hope will come out of this discussion, is thinking about, well, maybe the future is, like, I know partnering with some of the corporations to give you, discounts and things like that. Like a lot of it's not new stuff, but it's figuring out how do we invest more in change, right? How do we disrupt the way we've been doing things? Because I do think we can do it better,
right,
and more effectively. And I think it is interesting that we end up wanting change, but not wanting to invest in it.
That's right.
All of us have something we'd like to see perform more effectively, or do better, or I'd like to hear more birds, whatever. And I think that kind of thing is interesting, and also like looking at how nonprofits can intersect in some of the ways they haven't, or in some ways certain charities are doing it very well, like partnering with educational facilities, and National Wildlife Federation was very much into lobbying in around the we still are, but as well as legislation, like we were suing the government a lot, and so we partner with law firms, right? Or, law schools, and we'd get the students, and they would kind of come up, and so as a nonprofit, I think we're still adding a lot of value, but at the same time, I want to make sure that we are. I don't want to just have a job because it's existed in the past. I want it to continue to be, effective. So, when I hear about this topic, I'm thinking, what are our options here? Do we? And I don't think there's like a set answer, but I think there's a lot going on, and I have a lot of questions, and I want to hear what you guys are.
Okay.